He walked into a quiet lawyer's office, expecting nothing. Just the end of a story he thought was already gone. Instead, a veteran Navy SEAL was handed a rusted key and a hand-drawn map. His entire inheritance. His dog didn't bark, didn't move. Just locked eyes on that key like it understood something he didn't. The map led them deep into a forest no one dared to mention out loud. What they found there was a hidden bunker that should never have been discovered. And the deeper they went, the clearer it became. Someone had been waiting for this moment. Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The room smelled faintly of old wood and paper that had lived longer than most of the people who touched it. Time lingered there, not in a nostalgic way, but in the quiet, deliberate stillness of a place where decisions outlived emotions. Ethan Calder sat rigid in a leather chair that creaked softly beneath his weight. At 43, he carried himself like a man who had once been built for precision and purpose, and had never fully unlearned it. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that stretched the seams of his olive field jacket. The jacket itself was worn but clean, the fabric softened by years of use rather than neglect. Beneath it, a red and dark blue plaid shirt showed at the collar, tucked into dark cargo pants that bore the faint dust of long roads and longer nights. His boots, brown leather and scuffed at the edges, rested flat against the polished floor, unmoving. His face was sharp, angular, defined by a strong jawline shadowed with short, uneven stubble. Not a full beard, not clean-shaven either. Just enough to suggest a man who shaved when it mattered and stopped caring when it didn't. His eyes were a muted blue-gray, the kind that didn't wander much. But when they did, they seemed to carry weight with them. War had left its mark there. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way he watched things. Carefully. Quietly. Like he expected something to go wrong, even in silence. At his feet, Ronan lay still. The German shepherd was in his prime, 5, maybe 6 years old. His black and tan coat thick and healthy, muscles coiled beneath it like restrained energy. His ears twitched occasionally at distant sounds, footsteps in the hallway, a car passing outside. But his body remained grounded, calm, controlled. His amber eyes moved across the room in slow, deliberate sweeps, absorbing everything. Ronan wasn't restless. He was waiting. Across the desk sat Claire Whitmore. She was in her late 50s, her posture upright with the quiet discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime holding other people's secrets without letting them settle into her bones. Her hair, dark brown threaded with silver, was pulled neatly back, and a pair of reading glasses rested low on the bridge of her nose. She wore a charcoal gray suit, simple, clean, practical. No unnecessary detail, no wasted motion. "Mr. Calder," she said, her voice steady, measured. "Your grandfather's estate was modest." Ethan gave a slight nod. That word didn't surprise him. Neither did the tone. He hadn't seen the old man in nearly a decade, not since a quiet afternoon that ended with more silence than words. Back then, Ethan had been younger, angrier, maybe. He remembered the drive into town, the way his grandfather had kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, speaking only when necessary. Ethan had taken that silence as indifference. He had carried it with him ever since. Claire opened a thin folder and glanced down at the documents. After debts and final expenses, the remaining liquid assets total approximately $1,300. Ethan let out a quiet breath that almost passed for a laugh. About what I expected. He meant it, truly. He hadn't come for money. He wasn't sure why he had come at all. Claire studied him for a moment, as if weighing something unspoken. Then she nodded once and reached into the drawer beside her. "There is one additional item," she said. She placed a large, aged envelope on the desk. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed at the edges, sealed with a strip of old tape that had hardened over time. When it landed on the wood, something inside shifted with a dull, metallic clink. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Ronan's head lifted. Claire slid the envelope toward him. "Your grandfather left specific instructions. This was to be given directly to you." Ethan rested his hand on the envelope for a moment before opening it. The paper tore softly under his fingers. Inside was a key. It was heavier than he expected. Solid iron, darkened with age, edges worn smooth in places as if it had been handled often, long ago. It didn't belong in a modern world. It didn't belong in a lawyer's office. Beneath it, folded carefully, was a sheet of thick paper. Ethan set the key on the desk and opened the paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a map, hand-drawn. The lines were rough but precise. Roads, tree lines, elevation marks sketched in with a steady hand. A narrow path wound north into a dense forested region, ending near a ridge. A single red circle marked the destination. At the bottom of the map, written in firm, deliberate handwriting, were the words, "If you've come this far, don't turn back." Ethan stared at it. Something about the handwriting pulled at him. Not memory exactly, but recognition. A feeling that settled just beneath the surface, uncomfortable and familiar at the same time. And then Ronan stood up. No bark, no growl, just a sudden, quiet movement. The dog stepped closer to the desk, his body alert now, posture shifting ever so slightly forward. His eyes fixed on the iron key. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" he murmured under his breath. Ronan lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air once. Not at the envelope, not at the paper, but directly toward the key itself. His ears tilted forward, and for a brief second, his muscles tensed in a way Ethan hadn't seen since deployment. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. For a single heartbeat, the room felt different. Not darker, not colder, just wrong. Ethan reached out and picked up the key again. The metal was cold, unnaturally so, like it had never warmed under human touch. As his fingers closed around it, Ronan took a step back, not out of fear, but as if something unseen had crossed a line. Claire cleared her throat gently, pulling the moment back into focus. "According to county records," she said, adjusting her glasses, "your grandfather owned approximately 5 acres of land north of Silver Creek, remote property, forested, no registered structures." Ethan glanced back down at the map. "Then what does this open?" Claire shook her head. "He never said." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But he did say one thing." Ethan looked up. "That you would understand when you found it." Silence settled over the room again, heavier this time. Ethan turned the key slowly in his hand, studying the worn edges, the weight of it. It didn't look like it belonged to a house, or a car, or anything ordinary. It looked like it belonged to something that had been built to last, something meant to stay closed. He slid the map back into the envelope, his movements slower now, more deliberate. "Well," he said, standing up, "I guess I'll go see what $1,300 and a rusted key get me in the middle of nowhere." Claire stood as well, walking around the desk. She handed him a set of official documents: transfer of ownership, signatures, legal confirmations. "Your grandfather believed this property mattered," she said quietly. Ethan gave a faint, almost absent smile. "He also believed I'd play professional baseball." Claire didn't smile back. Instead, her eyes shifted briefly to Ronan. "That dog of yours," she said. "He's attentive." Ethan clipped the leash onto Ronan's collar, though the dog didn't need it. "He's the reason I'm still here," Ethan replied, and for once, there was no humor in his voice. He turned toward the door. "Mr. Calder?" Claire called softly. Ethan paused, looking back. "If you decide to go up there," she said, "I'd advise you to be careful." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Claire folded her arms lightly, her expression unreadable. "Because your grandfather wasn't the kind of man who held on to useless land." Ethan considered that for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Good to know." Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. The kind of cold that didn't just touch the skin. It slipped beneath it, settling somewhere deeper. Ethan opened the passenger door of his old pickup truck, and Ronan jumped in with practiced ease, turning once before settling into position. Always facing forward, always watching. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he pulled the envelope back out and unfolded the map across the steering wheel. 5 acres. A ridge. A forest that didn't show up clearly on modern navigation systems. A key that didn't belong to anything he understood. For a man who had spent years avoiding purpose, it was an inconvenient kind of invitation. Ronan leaned forward from the passenger seat and nudged Ethan's arm gently. Ethan glanced over. The dog's ears were still forward, still alert, still watching. Ethan let out a slow breath. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll take a look." The engine turned over with a low, tired rumble. As the truck pulled away from the curb, the town passed by in muted colors. Storefronts, street signs, people who had nothing to do with him. Behind them, the lawyer's office faded into the background. Ahead of them, the road stretched north, toward trees, toward silence, toward something that had been waiting a very long time. And for reasons Ethan couldn't explain yet. He knew he wasn't supposed to turn back. The road narrowed long before Ethan noticed the change. It wasn't a sudden shift. No sharp turn, no warning sign. Just a quiet fading. Asphalt softened into patched gravel, the painted lines disappeared, and the rhythm of the tires changed beneath the truck, from smooth hum to a low, uneven crunch that echoed faintly through the frame. Ronan noticed it first. The German shepherd adjusted his posture in the passenger seat, lifting his head higher, ears tilting forward as the world outside the windshield shifted from open road to something quieter, older. His body didn't tense, but it sharpened, like a blade brought slowly to the light. Ethan drove with one hand, resting on the wheel, the other loosely near the gear shift. His movements were controlled, almost absent-minded. But his eyes had narrowed slightly. The farther they went, the less the world felt like something meant to be traveled through. It felt kept. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows through the trees that began to crowd closer along the roadside. Pines stretched tall and straight, their dark green crowns swallowing light before it could reach the ground. The air coming through the cracked window was colder now, carrying the scent of damp earth and resin. A place like this didn't announce itself. It waited for you to arrive. By the time the first building appeared, Ethan almost missed it. A weathered gas pump stood alone at the edge of the road, its paint faded to a pale, uncertain color. Behind it, a wooden structure leaned slightly to one side, as though time had been pressing against it for years and it had simply chosen not to fall. A few hundred yards ahead, the town revealed itself. Silver Creek. It wasn't marked by a sign so much as by absence. No traffic lights, no storefront windows filled with bright displays. Just a scattering of buildings set loosely along the road. A diner with a flickering neon sign, a general store with peeling red paint, a row of houses spaced far enough apart to suggest distance was intentional. Everything looked intact. but nothing looked new. Ethan pulled into the gravel lot beside the general store. The tires crunched softly as the truck came to a stop. For a moment, he didn't move. He watched. People moved slowly here. A man stepped out of the diner, paused, glanced toward the truck, then looked away as if nothing had caught his attention. Across the street, a woman watering plants on a porch kept her head down, but her eyes flicked upward just long enough to take note of the unfamiliar vehicle. No one stared, but no one ignored him completely either. Ronan let out a quiet breath through his nose and shifted toward the door. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "Same feeling?" He opened the door, and the cold air wrapped around him instantly. Ronan jumped down beside him, landing lightly despite his size. He stretched once, then moved close to Ethan's side. Not crowding, not pressing, just present, always present. They walked toward the store. A small brass bell jingled as Ethan pushed the door open. Inside, the smell hit him first. Coffee, old wood, motor oil, a faint trace of something metallic beneath it all, like tools that had been used often and cleaned just enough to keep going. Behind the counter stood Owen Pike. He was in his early 60s, though the years sat heavier on him than the number suggested. His shoulders were broad, but slightly stooped, as if something had been weighing on them for longer than he could remember. A thick gray beard covered most of his jaw, and his hair, what remained of it, was short and uneven, more practical than styled. He wore a faded flannel shirt beneath a brown canvas jacket, sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms still strong despite age. His eyes were the kind that didn't miss much, pale, watchful, and lined with the quiet fatigue of someone who had seen things and chosen not to talk about them. Owen looked up from the register. His gaze went straight to Ronan. "Well now," he said, voice low but warm. "That's a fine dog." Ethan gave a small nod. "He's better than most people." Owen huffed a quiet laugh at that, leaning slightly forward to let Ronan sniff his hand. The dog did, once, deliberate, then pulled back, not unfriendly, just unconvinced. "Name?" Owen asked. "Ronan." "Fits him." Ethan moved through the aisles, picking up a flashlight, batteries, a bottle of water, a length of rope, practical things, things that suggested he wasn't just passing through. Owen rang them up slowly, watching without appearing to watch. "You passing through?" he asked casually. Ethan hesitated. Then he pulled the folded map from his jacket and set it on the counter. "Looking for something," he said. Owen unfolded it. The change was immediate. Not dramatic. No sudden gasp, no visible shock. Just a subtle shift. The kind you only noticed if you were used to watching people carefully. His fingers paused on the paper. His eyes moved to the red circle. And then, for just a second, something behind them closed. "Well," Owen muttered softly, more to himself than anyone else. Ethan didn't speak. He waited. "You know this place?" he asked after a moment. Owen folded the map back up, slower this time, and handed it to him. "That land," he said, "belonged to your grandfather." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "You knew him?" Owen nodded once. "Everyone around here did." There was a pause. Ethan leaned one elbow against the counter. "What kind of man was he?" Owen looked past him, out the front window, toward the distant line of trees that marked the edge of town. "Quiet," he said. "Didn't care much for crowds. Didn't care much for selling either." Ethan frowned. "Selling what?" Owen didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, a small, absent gesture that suggested discomfort more than hesitation. "That whole ridge up there," he said finally. "Folks been trying to buy it for years." "Why?" Owen's mouth tightened. "Money," he said. "It's always money." But the way he said it made it clear that wasn't the whole truth. Ethan studied him. People didn't want to sell? He asked. Owen let out a breath through his nose. Some did, he said. Some didn't. And the ones who didn't? Owen's eyes flicked back to the map in Ethan's hand. They had problems, he said quietly. No elaboration, no detail. Just that. Ronan moved, not suddenly, not aggressively, but his head turned toward the front window, ears locking forward, body still as stone. Ethan followed his gaze. Across the street, parked just beyond the diner, sat a black SUV. New. Too new. Its engine wasn't running, but someone was inside. Ethan couldn't see clearly through the tinted glass, but he felt it. The same way you feel eyes on your back before you turn around. For a brief moment, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. Owen noticed too. His jaw set tighter, the lines around his eyes deepening. You planning to head up there today? He asked, voice lower now. Ethan didn't look away from the SUV. Wasn't planning on staying long. Owen nodded once. Then don't, he said. Ethan glanced back at him. Don't what? Don't stay long. There was something final in the way he said it. Not a warning. Not exactly. More like advice from someone who had learned the hard way. Ethan gathered his things, sliding the map back into his jacket. Appreciate the help, he said. Owen didn't respond right away. As Ethan turned toward the door, the older man spoke again. Your grandfather, he said. He didn't keep that land for no reason. Ethan paused. Then why'd he keep it? Owen shook his head slowly. That ain't my story to tell. Outside, the air felt colder than before. The SUV was still there. Ethan didn't look directly at it this time. He didn't need to. Ronan stayed close as they crossed the gravel lot, his body angled slightly, not toward the truck, but not away from it either. Balanced, ready. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, closing the door with a muted thud. For a moment, he just sat there. The town stretched quietly around him, unchanged, untouched. But it felt different now, like something had shifted just beneath the surface. He started the engine. As the truck pulled back onto the road, he checked the mirror. The SUV didn't move immediately, but after a few seconds, it did. Slowly, casually, enough to stay behind. Ethan let out a quiet breath, eyes forward. Guess we're not the only ones interested, he muttered. Ronan didn't respond, but his ears stayed forward. The road out of Silver Creek wound toward the mountains, narrowing further, pulling them into the trees. Behind them, the town faded. Ahead of them, the forest waited. And somewhere beyond it, a piece of land no one wanted to talk about. A place people had learned to forget. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. He wasn't just looking for property anymore. He was stepping into something that had already begun moving. Long before he arrived. The road disappeared before Ethan realized it was gone. One moment there had been a narrow gravel path beneath the truck's tires, uneven, but still something shaped by human hands. The next, it simply ended. No barricade, no sign, just a quiet surrender to the forest, as if the land itself had decided that no one needed to go any farther. Ethan shut off the engine. The sudden silence pressed in around them. Ronan didn't move right away. He remained seated, eyes forward, ears tilted toward the tree line ahead. Waiting. Ethan reached for the folded map, spreading it across the steering wheel. The lines were crude but deliberate. The road they had followed was only ever meant to get them this far. Beyond this point, the markings shifted. Less about paths, more about direction, angles, elevation, landmarks that didn't exist on any modern chart. It wasn't a map for travelers. It was a map for someone who already knew how to read the land. Ethan exhaled slowly. All right, he muttered. "Guess we're walking." He stepped out of the truck, the cold air settling around him like something alive. Ronan followed instantly, landing beside him with quiet precision. The dog's body shifted as his paws touched the ground. Less relaxed now, more alert, as if crossing an invisible line between the known and the unknown. Ethan grabbed his pack, slinging it over one shoulder, and checked the gear inside without thinking. Flashlight, rope, water, knife. Habit. Always habit. Then he stepped into the trees. The forest swallowed sound. Not completely, but enough that everything felt softened, distant. The crunch of boots on pine needles didn't echo. The wind didn't whistle. Even the occasional bird call seemed to fade before it reached its end. The deeper they went, the taller the trees grew. Pines stretched upward like pillars in an ancient cathedral, their branches high above weaving a ceiling that filtered the light into thin, broken strands. The ground beneath them was uneven, layered with moss and damp soil that gave slightly underfoot. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't bright either. The kind of place where time didn't feel like it moved forward so much as settled. Ethan moved carefully, eyes shifting between the map and the terrain ahead. The markings made sense, but only if you knew what to look for. A fallen tree angled just right, a bend in a shallow stream, a cluster of rocks that didn't belong where they sat. Each one lined up with something on the page. Each one pulled him deeper. Ronan stayed just ahead of him, not leading, not pulling, but moving with a quiet purpose. Every few steps, the dog would pause, head tilting slightly, as if listening for something Ethan couldn't hear. At one point, Ethan veered slightly left, following what looked like a natural clearing between two dense lines of trees. Ronan stopped. Not abruptly, not dramatically. He simply didn't take another step. Ethan noticed after 2 paces. He turned back, brow tightening. What? Ronan stood still, body aligned forward, but his eyes shifted. Not toward Ethan, but toward the direction he had come from. The dog wasn't confused. He was refusing. Ethan studied the terrain again. The clearing looked easier, cleaner, less resistance, which meant it was wrong. He glanced back at the map, tracing the lines with his finger. Then he saw it. The slight incline he had missed. The path wasn't meant to go around it. It was meant to go through it. Ethan let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," he murmured. "All right." He adjusted his course. Ronan moved again. Hours passed without measure. The light shifted subtly above them, but beneath the canopy it barely mattered. The air grew colder the farther they climbed, carrying the scent of wet earth and something older. Stone, maybe. Or metal. Ethan didn't speak much. There was no one to talk to, and the silence felt appropriate. At some point he stopped checking the map as often. Not because he didn't need it, but because something about the terrain had begun to feel familiar in a way that didn't make sense. Like he had never been here before. But something in him had. Ronan froze. Not a gradual stop, a full halt. His body locked mid-step, ears snapping forward, eyes fixed on something ahead. Ethan reacted instantly, his hand dropping to the knife at his side, not drawing it, just resting there. "Ready?" "What is it?" he whispered. Ronan didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Ethan followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing, just trees, shadows, the same endless stretch of forest. Then something shifted. Not movement, not sound, just a break in the pattern. A line where there shouldn't have been one. Ethan stepped forward slowly, eyes narrowing. The ground sloped upward slightly ahead of them, forming a shallow ridge covered in moss and tangled undergrowth Vines hung down from above, draping over the incline in uneven layers. From a distance, it looked natural, untouched. But the closer he got, the more something felt off. The slope was too smooth, too even. Ethan reached out, brushing aside a curtain of thin, dry vines. Beneath them, gray, flat, not stone, not soil, concrete. He stopped. Ronan stepped closer beside him, his presence steady, unwavering. Ethan pushed more of the vines aside, exposing a larger section. The shape became clearer, a wall, not vertical in the way buildings were, but angled, embedded into the hillside itself. Thick, solid, its edges softened by time, but its structure undeniable. This wasn't something that had been placed here. It had been built into the land. Hidden. Ethan moved to the side, clearing more of the overgrowth. The full outline revealed itself slowly. 2 reinforced concrete sides, partially swallowed by the earth. A narrow path of old stone leading inward. And at the center, a steel door. Dark, heavy, almost completely concealed beneath years of creeping growth and shadow. From more than a few feet away, it vanished entirely into the forest. No wonder no one had found it. You had to be looking for it. And even then, you had to believe it was there. Ethan stood still, staring at it. His breathing slowed, though his pulse didn't. "This is it," he said quietly. Not a question, a realization. Ronan stepped forward, stopping just short of the entrance. His head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring once as he took in the scent. Then he looked back at Ethan. Not urging, not warning, just acknowledging. Ethan walked the length of the structure, his boots crunching softly over the thin layer of debris that had settled there over the years. The concrete was weathered but intact. No major cracks, no signs of collapse. Whoever built this, they knew what they were doing. He stopped in front of the door. Up close, it felt different. The air was colder here, still, the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a living forest. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the key. It felt heavier now. Or maybe he was just more aware of it. For a moment, he didn't move. The past had been something he avoided for years. And now, it stood in front of him, solid, silent, waiting. Ronan shifted beside him, sitting down just off to the side of the entrance. His posture relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on the door, always watching, always present. Ethan looked down at the key in his hand, then back at the door. He exhaled slowly. "All right," he said under his breath. He stepped forward. Ethan stood there longer than he expected. Not because he didn't understand what he was looking at, but because some part of him did, and didn't want to admit it yet. The forest pressed close behind him, dense and breathing, alive in a way that felt almost indifferent. But in front of him, embedded into the slope like a scar the land had chosen not to heal, was something entirely different. Still, silent, unnatural. The concrete structure didn't reveal itself all at once. It resisted discovery even now, thick vines draped across its surface, their dry tendrils clinging stubbornly as if they had grown there with purpose. Moss crept along the edges, softening the hard lines, disguising angles that had once been sharp and deliberate. From a distance, it could have passed for nothing more than an uneven rise in the terrain. Up close, it felt like something that had been waiting. Ethan stepped forward slowly, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. He reached out and pulled a curtain of vines aside, exposing more of the surface beneath. Concrete, cold gray, weathered, but intact. 2 reinforced walls framed a narrow, recessed entryway, their thickness suggesting not just structure, but intent. Whoever built this hadn't been concerned with appearances. They had built for endurance, for secrecy, for time. Ronan stood just off to Ethan's right, his body aligned with the entrance but angled slightly outward, as if guarding both the man and the unseen space beyond. His ears moved constantly, catching distant shifts in the forest, but his eyes remained fixed on the darkened doorway. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't relaxed either. Ethan moved closer. A short path of flat stones led inward, partially buried beneath years of fallen debris. He cleared a few of them with the side of his boot, revealing the original shape. A deliberate walkway guiding someone to the door. To the threshold. And there it was. The steel door. Set deep into shadow, its surface almost black beneath layers of age. Rust had formed along the edges but hadn't consumed it. The hinges, thick and reinforced, were still intact. Above it, barely visible beneath the overgrowth, a corroded metal railing stretched across the upper edge of the structure. Once a safety feature, now little more than a relic. This place hadn't been forgotten. It had been abandoned with purpose. Ethan stood directly in front of the door now, close enough to see the keyhole, close enough to feel the temperature change. The air here was colder than the rest of the forest. Not dramatically, but enough that it settled against his skin differently. He noticed it the way soldiers notice small shifts before something goes wrong. A pressure. A stillness that didn't belong. He reached into his jacket. The iron key rested in his palm, heavier than before, not physically, but in meaning. The edges pressed against his skin, grounding him in the moment. For years, Ethan had avoided anything that felt like a beginning. Because beginnings meant direction, and direction meant responsibility. He had learned to live without both. Ronan shifted slightly beside him. Ethan glanced down. The dog had stepped closer now, but not toward the door. Instead, he positioned himself just behind Ethan's right leg, his body lightly touching it. A rare gesture. Not protective in the aggressive sense. Anchoring. Ethan exhaled. "Yeah," he murmured softly. "I know." For a brief second, Ethan hesitated. Not because of the door, not because of what might be inside, but because of something else. A memory, sharp and sudden, cut through him. His grandfather's hands. Old, steady, resting on a steering wheel years ago, knuckles worn but unmoving. The silence that filled the truck that day. The words that were never said. Ethan had spent years believing that silence meant distance. Now, standing here, holding the key that man had left behind. It felt like something else entirely. Like a message that had simply taken longer to reach him. The moment passed. But it left something behind. Ethan stepped forward. The key slid into the lock with resistance, not from misalignment, but from time itself. Rust scraped faintly against metal as he adjusted the angle, pushing it deeper until it settled into place. For a second, nothing happened. Then, he turned it. The sound echoed, a dry, grinding shift inside the mechanism, like something waking after a long sleep. The resistance gave way slowly, reluctantly, until, click. The sound was small, but it carried. Ronan's ears flicked forward. Ethan wrapped both hands around the handle. The metal was colder than anything he had touched in years. He pulled. At first, the door didn't move. It resisted, not locked, but held in place by years of stillness, by the weight of dirt and time pressing against it. Ethan planted one boot against the stone path, bracing himself. Then he pulled harder. The hinges groaned. A deep, strained sound that echoed through the concrete walls, reverberating back into the forest behind them. Birds somewhere above took flight, their wings breaking the silence in a sudden rush. And then, the door gave. Slowly, reluctantly. It opened just enough for something inside to breathe. A gust of air rushed outward. Cold. Stale. It carried a scent that hit Ethan immediately. Dust, old metal, something faintly chemical beneath it all. Not decay. Preservation. Ronan stepped back half a pace, nostrils flaring once as he processed the unfamiliar air. He didn't retreat, but he acknowledged it. Ethan pulled the door open wider. The darkness inside wasn't complete, but it was deep enough to swallow the light that tried to enter. A narrow set of concrete steps descended sharply, disappearing into shadow. The beam from Ethan's flashlight cut through it, revealing just enough. Reinforced walls, steel supports, straight lines. Nothing natural. "This isn't a storage room," Ethan muttered under his breath. Ronan moved forward again, stepping carefully to the edge of the entrance. He peered inside, head slightly lowered, body poised but controlled, waiting for Ethan. Always waiting. Ethan stood at the threshold. The forest behind him still existed. He could feel it. The wind, the distant rustle of branches, the open sky somewhere beyond the canopy. But in front of him, there was something else. Something sealed away. Not forgotten. Protected. He took one step forward, then another. The sound of his boots changed immediately as they met the concrete, sharper, more defined. The air grew colder with each step down, pressing in around him like a quiet warning. Ronan followed without hesitation. The dog stayed close now, closer than before, his body aligned with Ethan's movements, his presence a steady rhythm against the unfamiliar silence. The beam of the flashlight moved with Ethan's hand, revealing more as they descended. The walls were clean, not spotless, but maintained once. There were no signs of collapse. No cracks deep enough to suggest age had weakened the structure. This place had been built to last. At the bottom of the stairs, the light widened. A room, square, deliberate. Shelving lined one wall, empty at first glance but coated in a fine layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. A metal table stood near the center, bolted to the floor. In one corner, a generator unit sat silent. Its surface dulled, but intact. Ethan stepped fully into the space. His breath slowed. Not from fear, from recognition. Not of the place, but of the feeling. He had been in rooms like this before. Different country, different war. Same purpose. Hidden, secure, prepared. Ronan moved ahead of him, sniffing carefully along the edges of the room. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, not searching, but confirming, safe. For now. Ethan turned slowly, taking it all in. "This wasn't random," he said quietly. "No one built something like this without a reason. No one hid it this well without expecting someone to come looking." He looked back toward the stairs, toward the door, toward the forest beyond it. For years he had believed the past was something you left behind, something that faded with distance. But standing here now, he understood something he hadn't before. The past didn't disappear. It waited. And sometimes, it built something solid enough that you couldn't ignore it anymore. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight, then took another step into the room. The bunker did not feel abandoned. That was the first thing Ethan understood. Not as an idea, not as a guess, as something physical, something that settled into his chest the longer he stood there, the longer he let his eyes adjust to the quiet geometry of the space. It wasn't the dust. There was dust, yes. A thin, undisturbed layer across the metal shelves and concrete floor, but not enough to suggest decay. Not enough to say this place had been forgotten. It felt paused, like someone had stepped away with the intention of returning. Ethan moved slowly, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the room. Shelves lined the far wall, stacked with old ration boxes, their labels faded but still legible beneath the grime. Military surplus. Compact, efficient. The kind of supplies designed to last, not for days, but for months. A metal table stood near the center, bolted to the ground. Papers lay scattered across it, not in chaos, but in the quiet order of someone who had left them mid-thought. In the corner, a narrow cot rested against the wall. A wool blanket had been folded with care, its edges still sharp despite the years. Beside it, a small wooden crate served as a nightstand. On top of it sat a rusted lantern and a half-empty tin cup. Ethan stopped there. He didn't touch anything yet. He didn't need to. This wasn't a storage room. This was a life. Ronan moved through the space with deliberate caution, his nose low, his steps soft against the concrete. He wasn't searching for threats anymore. He was reading the room, confirming what had been here, who had been here. Ethan exhaled slowly. He lived here, he murmured. Not temporarily, not in passing. He lived here. The realization sat heavier than anything else so far. For years, Ethan had believed his grandfather had simply walked away. That the distance between them had been a choice made out of indifference, or worse. Now, standing in this place, that belief didn't hold. Ethan moved toward the table. The papers there were brittle with age, edges curling slightly, ink faded but still visible. Maps, notes, columns of numbers written in a steady, practiced hand. Not frantic, not disorganized, intentional. He reached for one, scanning it briefly. Coordinates, landmarkers, dates, all tied to the same region, this valley, this ridge. His eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't just hiding, he said under his breath. This was tracking. Ronan stopped. The dog turned his head slightly, ears lifting, not toward Ethan, but toward the far side of the room. Ethan noticed. What is it? Ronan didn't move immediately. Then, slowly, he walked toward the cot. Ethan followed. There was nothing unusual at first glance. Just the bed. The crate. The same quiet stillness that filled the rest of the bunker. But Ronan stopped beside the crate. He lowered his head, sniffing once. Then again. Slower this time. Ethan crouched beside him. What did you find? Ronan didn't paw at it, didn't scratch. He simply stood there, his body angled slightly toward the crate, his attention fixed, not on top of it, but beneath. Ethan reached down and slid the crate aside. It moved easier than expected. Too easy. Beneath it, a wooden box, smaller than the crate, but older. The surface worn smooth in places where hands had touched it often. The lid creaked slightly as Ethan lifted it open. Inside, a photograph. Ethan froze. He picked it up carefully, brushing away the thin layer of dust. A young boy sat on an older man's shoulders, both of them laughing, caught mid-motion in a moment that felt too alive to belong in a place like this. The boy was him, younger, maybe 6, hair longer, eyes brighter, no weight behind them yet. Ethan stared at it. For a long time, he didn't move. Ronan sat beside him, close enough that Ethan could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. Grounding, always grounding. Ethan turned the photograph over. The handwriting was faded, but still clear enough. For when you're ready to understand. His throat tightened. He set the photo down gently and reached deeper into the box. There was an envelope beneath it, sealed, aged, waiting. Ethan hesitated for only a second this time before opening it. The paper inside crackled softly as he unfolded it. The handwriting matched the note, steady, deliberate, familiar in a way that no longer felt distant. Ethan sat down on the edge of the cot. Ronan settled at his feet, and he began to read. Halfway through the letter, Ethan stopped. Not because the words didn't make sense, but because they did. Too much. I had to make you believe I had let you go. Ethan's grip tightened on the paper. A memory surfaced, clearer now than it had ever been. That day, the silence in the truck, the way his grandfather hadn't looked at him when he stepped out. Ethan had thought it was rejection. Now, it felt like something else entirely. Something heavier. Something chosen. Ethan continued reading. The letter unfolded piece by piece, each line pulling back something he had spent years trying not to examine too closely. His grandfather had known what was happening in the valley, known who was behind it. Victor Hale. The name appeared more than once, not emphasized, not dramatized, but present, constant, like a shadow cast over everything else. Ethan's jaw tightened as he read. Hale hadn't just been buying land. He had been taking it. Systematically, legally, through pressure, through control. Banks, legal claims, contracts designed to fail. Families pushed out one by one until the land became something else entirely. Something owned, something controlled, and at the center of it, this ridge. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. His grandfather hadn't been hiding from the world. He had been hiding from something inside it. Ronan stood. The movement was subtle, but purposeful. Ethan looked up. What is it now? The dog walked toward the center of the room. Not hurried, not tense, just certain. He stopped, and this time, he didn't look at anything above ground. He looked down. Ethan stood, crossing the room slowly. Ronan circled once, then sat beside a spot that looked no different from the rest of the floor. Concrete, flat, unremarkable. Ethan frowned slightly. You're sure about this? Ronan didn't move. Ethan crouched, brushing his hand across the surface. At first, nothing. Then, a difference. Subtle, a seam, barely visible beneath the dust. Perfectly square. Ethan's pulse picked up slightly. He reached for the knife at his side, sliding the blade carefully into the thin gap. He applied pressure. For a moment, it resisted. Then, it shifted. Just enough. Ethan set the knife aside and gripped the edge with both hands, lifting slowly. The panel came free with a low scrape of concrete against concrete. Beneath it, a compartment. Dark, deliberate, hidden. Ethan set the slab aside and leaned forward, angling the flashlight down into the opening. A metal lockbox sat inside. He lifted it out carefully, placing it on the table. Ronan moved closer, watching. Ethan opened it. Inside, cash. Stacks of it, bound tightly, preserved. But that wasn't what held his attention. Beneath the money, a ledger. Leather-bound, worn, heavy. Ethan picked it up slowly. The cover creaked faintly as he opened it. Inside, names, dates, transactions, page after page of careful documentation. Not random, not scattered, systematic. Every entry tied back to the same pattern. Land, transfers, losses. And one name, repeated, again and again. Victor Hale. Ethan closed the ledger halfway, his expression hardening. This is it, he said quietly. Proof. Not suspicion, not theory, proof. Ronan sat beside him, calm again now, watching, waiting. Ethan looked down at the book in his hands. For years he had avoided anything that felt like a fight. But this wasn't something you walked away from. Not anymore. Ethan didn't realize how long he'd been staring at the ledger until his eyes began to ache. The bunker had grown quieter with time, not because the sounds had disappeared, but because his mind had begun to filter them out. The faint hum of wind above the mountain. The subtle creak of aging concrete adjusting to temperature shifts. Even Ronan's breathing, steady and controlled at his side, had become part of the background. All that remained were the pages. Ethan flipped another one. Names, dates, locations, each line written in the same careful hand. No hesitation, no correction, just a steady record of something that had been happening for years. Parcel 18. A. Transferred through foreclosure. Parcel 22C. Mineral rights dispute, resolved through court ruling. Parcel 31F. Family relocation following tax reassessment. He leaned back slowly. It looked like paperwork. But it wasn't. It was a pattern, a method. Victor Hale hadn't taken the valley by force. He had taken it by system. Ethan ran a hand across his face, the rough stubble catching against his palm. My grandfather didn't just hold the land, he muttered. He held the line. Ronan lifted his head slightly, watching him, not reacting, just present. Ethan closed the ledger halfway, his gaze drifting across the bunker again. Everything here made sense now. The supplies, the maps, the isolation. This wasn't fear. This was preparation. His grandfather hadn't been hiding. He had been waiting. The phone rang. The sound cut through the bunker like a blade, sharp, out of place. Ethan's hand went instinctively to his pocket, pulling it out as he stood. No signal. Or at least, there hadn't been, but now, one bar flickered weakly at the corner of the screen. Unknown number. Ethan hesitated for half a second before answering. Calder? Mr. Calder. Claire Whitmore's voice came through, calm but tighter than before. I'm glad you answered. Ethan straightened slightly. What's going on? A brief pause, then, we have a problem. Ethan didn't speak. He waited. Victor Hale's company filed a legal claim this morning, Claire continued. They're asserting that your grandfather's land was used as collateral for an outstanding loan. According to their records, the debt was never repaid. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's not possible. I believe you, Claire said quietly. But they've submitted documentation that's convincing enough for a preliminary hearing. How long? 48 hours. The words settled heavily. If we don't challenge it before then, she continued, the court could grant temporary transfer of ownership. Ethan stared at the concrete wall in front of him. 48 hours. After years of silence. After everything his grandfather had done to keep this place hidden. It came down to 2 days. They're moving fast, he said. Yes, Claire replied, too fast. Which means they expect no resistance. Ethan's eyes flicked down to the ledger on the table. They're wrong. There was a pause on the line, then softer. What did you find up there? Ethan didn't answer directly. Enough, he said. I'll come to you. Be careful, Claire said. If they're pushing legally, there's a chance they're pushing elsewhere too. The call ended. The signal dropped immediately after. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. For a moment he didn't move. Ronan stood. Not because of the call, because of something else. The dog's body shifted, ears rising, head turning toward the bunker's stairs. Ethan followed his gaze. The silence above felt different now. Not empty, occupied. A faint sound, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. A step. Ethan's body reacted before his mind did. The flashlight snapped off. Darkness swallowed the bunker. Ronan moved closer without a sound, his body low, controlled. Another sound. Gravel shifting. Not far, not random. Deliberate. Someone was above them. Ethan waited, breathing slow, measured, his heartbeat steady, not calm, but controlled. Years of training didn't disappear. They just waited for moments like this. The sounds above shifted again. A pause. Then silence. Too complete. Ethan counted in his head. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Nothing. Finally, he reached for the flashlight again, clicking it on but keeping the beam low. Ronan didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the stairwell. "They're close," Ethan whispered. Not guessing, knowing. He moved quickly now, gathering the ledger, the documents, the envelope. The steel lockbox stayed where it was, too heavy, too obvious. The essentials went into his pack. The truth. That's what mattered. He paused at the base of the stairs, listening again. Nothing. But that didn't mean safety. It meant waiting. Ethan moved up slowly, each step placed with care. Ronan followed, close enough that Ethan could feel the heat of him, even in the cold air. At the top, Ethan stopped. He didn't open the door fully, just enough to let a thin line of light cut through. The forest outside looked the same. Still. Quiet. But something had changed. The ground near the entrance. Disturbed. Fresh. Boot prints. At least 2, maybe 3. Ethan crouched, examining them quickly. Deep impressions. Heavy weight. Not hikers. Not locals. Men who expected to carry something. Or take something. Ronan stepped forward, sniffing once, then lifting his head again. Alert, focused, not panicked. Ethan stood slowly. "They don't know exactly where it is," he said under his breath. "But they're close. Very close." He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. But that didn't mean no one was watching. Ethan stepped back inside the bunker, closing the door carefully, lowering it into place without a sound. The darkness returned. But it felt different now. Smaller, more urgent. He leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. For years, he had avoided this. Conflict, responsibility. The kind of situation that didn't offer easy exits. Now, it stood in front of him again. Clear, unavoidable. Ethan looked down at the pack in his hand. Inside it, the ledger, the proof, the thing his grandfather had protected at the cost of everything else. And beneath that, the money. Enough to disappear, enough to leave, to walk away from this mountain, from this town, from everything that had just found him again. He closed his eyes for a moment and saw it. A road heading south, a small town where no one knew his name. Work that didn't ask questions, silence that stayed silent. Peace. Ronan shifted beside him. Ethan opened his eyes. The dog stood there, not blocking the path, not pulling him in any direction. Just there. Present, steady, unjudging. Ethan let out a quiet breath. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" he muttered. Ronan's tail moved once. Slow, calm. Ethan looked back at the bunker, at the space his grandfather had lived in, at the place where a man had chosen to stand alone rather than let something wrong continue. Then he looked at the stairs, at the world waiting above. 48 hours. That's all he had. Ethan tightened the straps on his pack. The weight settled across his shoulders. Not unfamiliar, not unwanted, just returned. "All right," he said quietly. Not to Ronan, not to the bunker, to himself. He turned toward the stairs. This time, there was no hesitation. The courthouse in Silver Creek had never been built to hold tension like this. It was too small, too old. The wooden beams overhead creaked softly with every shift of weight in the room, as if even the structure itself wasn't used to being part of something this heavy. Ethan sat at the defense table, his posture straight but not rigid. The olive field jacket rested naturally over his shoulders, the familiar weight grounding him in a place that felt anything but stable. His hands were folded loosely in front of him, but his eyes, those quiet, steel-blue eyes, never stopped moving. Ronan lay beside his boots, still, silent, watching. Across the room sat Victor Hale. He looked exactly like the kind of man who had never lost control of anything in his life. Tall, composed, and precise in every movement, Victor wore a dark charcoal coat that fit him too perfectly to be accidental. His hair was neatly combed, streaked faintly with early silver at the temples. His face was sharp, symmetrical, controlled. No wasted expression, no visible emotion. But it was his eyes that stood out, cold, calculating. The kind of eyes that didn't react. They measured. Behind him sat his legal team, 3 men in tailored suits, each one carrying the quiet confidence of people who had never needed to raise their voices to win. Their movements were efficient, rehearsed, as if this outcome had already been decided before anyone entered the room. At the bench, Judge Harold Benson adjusted his glasses. He was in his late 60s, with thinning white hair and a face shaped by decades of small-town decisions. His expression was neutral, but his eyes carried something deeper, a kind of quiet awareness that suggested he understood more than he would ever say out loud. "Proceed," the judge said. Victor's lead attorney stood. His name was Daniel Crow, mid-40s, clean-shaven, hair cut short and neat. The kind of man who spoke in measured tones and never wasted a word. His suit was dark, his tie perfectly aligned, his presence calm to the point of being unsettling. "Your Honor," Crow began, "this case is straightforward. The property in question was used as collateral for a loan that remains unpaid. Our documentation, filed with the court, supports this claim." He spoke without hesitation, without doubt, like a man reading something already approved. Ethan didn't move. He listened and waited. Across the table, Claire Whitmore rose. She looked different here, not because of what she wore, but because of how she carried herself. The calm professionalism was still there, but beneath it, something sharper had emerged. Resolve. "Your Honor," Claire said, placing the leather ledger carefully on the table, "the defense would like to introduce new evidence." The room shifted. Not visibly, but something changed. Victor's eyes flicked downward, just briefly, then back up. Claire opened the ledger. Her fingers moved slowly across the pages, not for effect, but for precision. "These records," she continued, "document a pattern of land acquisition conducted by Victor Hale's company over the past decade." Daniel Crow smiled faintly. "With respect, Your Honor." "Let her finish," Judge Benson said quietly. Crow sat. The smile faded. Claire turned a page. "Parcel 18A," she read. "Transferred following foreclosure proceedings initiated under disputed financial terms." Another page. "Parcel 22C. Mineral rights claim filed. Ownership transferred within 90 days of legal challenge." The courtroom grew quieter. People in the back shifted slightly, farmers, shop owners, men and women who had lived in this valley long enough to recognize the names being spoken. Claire continued. "Each of these entries is supported by corresponding documentation, contracts, payment records, legal filings." She paused. Then, "They are not isolated incidents." Ethan leaned forward slightly. Ronan's head lifted. The moment tightened. From the back of the room, a chair scraped. Not loud, but enough. Owen Pike stood, slowly, deliberately. He looked older here than he had in his store. The lines in his face deeper, his shoulders heavier, but his eyes clearer, like something he had carried for years had finally shifted. That book, Owen said, his voice rough but steady. It's real. Every head turned. Victor's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened, just slightly. Owen stepped forward, one hand resting briefly on the bench for support before continuing. I've seen it before, he said. Not all of it, but enough. The silence in the room deepened. Your Honor, Owen continued, folks around here, we didn't lose our land by accident. He looked directly at Victor now. We lost it because we were pushed. The shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable. Daniel Crow stood again, sharper this time. Your Honor, this is anecdotal. Sit down, the judge said. Crow hesitated, then sat. Judge Benson leaned forward, his gaze moving from Owen to the ledger, then to Victor. Mr. Hale, he said, would you like to respond? Victor stood, slowly, carefully. His voice when he spoke was calm, measured. These accusations, he said, are based on incomplete information. Business transactions are often misunderstood by those unfamiliar with. The courtroom doors opened. Two men stepped inside. State investigators, plain clothes but unmistakable. One of them approached the bench, handing the judge a document. Judge Benson read it, once, then again. When he looked up, the room felt different. Victor Hale, he said, you are now under formal investigation for multiple counts of fraud and unlawful acquisition of property. Victor didn't react immediately. For the first time, he paused, not visibly shaken, but no longer in control. The hearing didn't end with victory, not cleanly, not simply, but it ended with something else. Enough. The foreclosure claim was halted. The investigation opened. The system, Victor's system, had cracked, and for the first time in years, the valley had a chance to breathe. Later that evening, Ethan drove back toward the mountains. The road felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. Ronan sat beside him, calm again, his posture relaxed in a way Ethan hadn't seen since before the bunker. The forest greeted them the same way it always had. Quiet, patient, unmoving. Ethan parked near the base of the ridge and stepped out. The air was colder now, but it didn't feel heavy, not anymore. He walked the familiar path back to the concealed structure, pushing aside the vines, revealing the steel door once more. He opened it, not out of necessity, not out of fear, but out of understanding. The bunker remained as it had been, still, silent, waiting. Ethan stepped inside. He looked around one last time, at the cot, the table, the shelves, the life his grandfather had built beneath the world. I get it now, he said quietly. Not an apology, not forgiveness, something else, acceptance. He turned and walked back out, closing the door behind him, not sealing it forever, but leaving it as it was. A place that had done its job, nothing more. Above it, the land opened, not wide, not vast, but enough. Sunlight filtered through the trees, reaching the ground in soft, broken patches. For the first time since arriving, Ethan noticed it. This place wasn't just hidden, it was protected. He set his pack down. Ronan moved ahead, circling once before stopping, looking back, waiting. Ethan smiled faintly. Yeah, he said, right here. He pulled a small toolkit from the truck. Simple tools. Nothing complicated. A hammer, a measuring tape, wood stakes. He drove the first one into the ground. The sound echoed softly through the trees. Not loud, but certain. Ronan barked once, then trotted a short distance before circling back again. His energy lighter now, freer. Ethan placed another stake, then another, each one marking something new. Not a bunker, not a hiding place, A home. He stepped back, looking at the rough outline forming in the earth. Small, simple, enough. Ronan returned to his side, standing close but not touching. Ethan rested a hand briefly against the dog's neck. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent a long time thinking I didn't belong anywhere." Ronan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Ethan looked out across the ridge, the distant valley visible through breaks in the trees. "I think I was wrong." The wind moved gently through the branches. The light shifted, and for the first time in years, nothing in Ethan's chest felt like it was waiting to break. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with noise or light. They come quietly, through the people we almost lost, the paths we never meant to walk, and the moments we thought were the end. Ethan believed he had been abandoned. He believed the silence meant he was forgotten. But in truth, every step he took led him back to something that had been protected for him all along. Not just land, not just truth, but a second chance to understand, to heal, and to stand for what is right. Maybe that is how God works in our lives. Not by removing every hardship, but by placing something or someone beside us to guide us through it. Sometimes it's a loyal companion who never leaves. Sometimes it's a truth hidden until we are strong enough to face it. And sometimes it's the quiet realization that we were never alone, even when it felt that way. In your own life, there may be moments where things don't make sense, where doors close, where people walk away. But that doesn't always mean something is ending. Sometimes it means something is being protected, waiting for the right time to reveal itself. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need a reminder that they are not alone. Leave a comment and tell me what part of this journey stayed with you the most. And if you believe stories like this still matter, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and bring light into the places where you need it most.